Hi.
Hey.
Hi,
Hello, this is Dustin.
this is Vic,
This is Kyle.
Chris.
and you're listening to Brainwaves,
You're listening to Brainwaves.
You're listening to
Brainwaves.
Brainwaves.
Your guide
to all things ADHD.
ADHD.
It's ADHD.
Brought to you by Shimmer.
Shimmer.
to Shimmer, the #1 coaching platform.
Coaching platform
For people
People with ADHD.
with ADHD.
for people with ADHD.
Hey there, my name is Orion, and today I am joined by my two co-hosts, Coach Noel
Hi there.
and Trina from My Lady ADHD.
Hello.
Today we have a question from the community about communication and relationships.
Hello, this is Trina from Knoxville, and I'm wondering, I have a bad habit of interrupting people a lot. Most of the time I don't even realize it, or I realize it too late. It frustrates my husband and my family. What can I do to address this?
That's a great question, Trina from Knoxville. I'm sure a lot of our listeners can relate to this. Is this something that you feel like you deal with as well?
Yeah, because I am Trina from Knoxville. I submitted this one because I'm struggling here, and I think that other people with ADHD can relate to this one, and I don't think it's talked about enough, so that was me. I'm the problem. It's me. This is for sure something that literally this week I've had at least 2 different clients who brought this up, so it's a very, very common challenge. Yeah, I find that this is an issue with everyone in my life, family, friends, people at work. This is anytime I'm in a social situation, this comes up. It's something that I'm deeply aware of, that I've been called out on. I mean, it's a problem for me. So I just wanted to bring it to the table.
I feel like I do this all the time, but I'm always unaware of it in the moment. And it's always in that you leave the interaction and then you're just replaying the conversation over and over in your head.
Yeah. It's going to be hard for us to not interrupt one another
I know.
while
I'm
filming.
trying so hard right now.
I know.
So obviously this is a thing that we all deal with.
I mean, I've been flat out told that I was rude for interrupting. It's definitely something that comes up in conversation with me and my husband, because it can sometimes derail his train of thought, because I will interrupt him while he's in the middle of telling a story, and then I go off on my own tangent, and then he doesn't know where he was. So it comes up a lot. But yeah, I've been told that I was rude, or, and I get it, but it is so difficult to manage. So that's why I'm hoping we can talk about it today. Yeah, I mean, the rude thing is totally common. A lot of people will hear things like, oh, you should just think before you speak, or you don't have any discipline or willpower, you're an asshole. But it's not something that I've personally experienced. I've generally been the listener. And while I do definitely interrupt on occasion, I just personally haven't gotten any feedback. But I hear all those types of feedback from clients constantly.
The just think before you speak is one that like kills me, because do you know me? That's literally what I'm doing all the time. It doesn't stop.
Well, but also sometimes people won't say anything, but they'll just they'll give you that look where know, ooh, I've stuck my foot in it this time, didn't I? Like you've said something, or you've interrupted before you even thought about it, and you get that look from the other person. Like sometimes they won't say anything, but Yeah, it feels to me the same as when you tell someone that you're depressed, you're sad, and they're like, well, just think positive. Mm-hmm. So helpful. Like, I can stop paying my therapist now. Like,
obviously, we're not doing it to be rude. Both of you are like the least rude people I know in the world. So what is going on? Yeah, well, the actual underlying symptom is called impulse control or response inhibition. It's basically the ability to stop and think before you do a thing, which is kind of our whole thing with ADHD. We lack that ability innately to do that. We have to learn how to do that. There's other reasons for interrupting, maybe being super excited or being bored and wanting to speed up the conversation. Maybe you're really worried that you're going to forget what you wanted to say. But I think probably the most common underlying issue is that symptom of impulse control. Okay, so can you break down impulse control for us a little bit? Just so, because you mentioned response inhibition and impulse control. Are they the same thing? Yeah, they're really basically 2 different terms for the same thing. Just kind of depends who you're talking to. But phrase you want to use, their response inhibition, impulse control is one of the main executive functions that we have.
And executive functions are the set of mental skill that we need in order to learn, work, manage daily life. Some people describe it as the management system of your brain. So I need a manager. And it has to be me? Oh, Lord.
You need a school teacher version of Trina with a ruler.
Yeah. I need to hire a manager for all those things, basically. I saw a meme that was, I am so bad at functioning. How did I become an executive at it?
I feel like everybody has this problem. This isn't just an ADHD problem, right? But the way that it works with people with ADHD obviously differs. It's something that we struggle with more than maybe somebody who doesn't have ADHD. I guess, why do we have a harder time with this?
I guess let's define, really is impulse control or response inhibition, the ability to suppress actions that are inappropriate in a given context or that interfere with goal-driven behavior. So in English, to stop and evaluate before making a decision. So the reason that people with ADHD struggle more with this, it gets kind of complex with all the scientific jargon, but there's actually a few different metaphors that I think really illustrate it well. So the overall idea is that the ADHD brain is super powerful and fast, and the part of the brain that is responsible for being aware in the moment and making you pause is slower and weaker. So Russell Barkley has the analogy of a Ferrari with bicycle brakes, which is a really good analogy, I think. At Shimmer, we had the elephant and rider. So the elephant is your in the moment, what I need and want right now part of your brain. The rider sitting on top is looking out ahead, those goals, the values that we have. It's supposed to control the elephant, but if the elephant is just too strong, that rider can't overpower it. There's a book that I read. It's a children's book called My Brain is a Race Car. And I love that analogy. And I think we talked about that prior. But the elephant and the rider, a good visual because it feels so big, and an elephant is so big, and it does feel hard to manage sometimes. So I think I actually prefer that analogy a little bit, but there aren't brakes for me. My brakes, I need to go to the shop and figure out how to get some brake pads because there just aren't any.
Is there a brain shop where we can go get brakes?
Man, if there is, I'm going to be pissed because someone should have told me about it earlier.
When I start thinking about my ADHD and my tendency to make impulsive decisions and stuff like this, I feel like this also might affect more than just me interrupting, especially in like relationships and stuff like that.
It causes a lot of different symptoms, not just interrupting. So overspending, overeating, outbursts, other risky behavior, fidgeting might, kind of be related to that. Being impatient and easily distracted, those are all sort of connected to the executive function of response inhibition. I feel like you just described my personality. I'm like checking them off one at a time, and it doesn't feel good. Like none of that, it doesn't feel good to hear those things like in a list like that, but I resonate personally with every single one of those. And I think women face a different reaction to doing all of these things than men do sometimes. I think that speaking out or fidgeting or lack of patience for women is just viewed differently than it is for men too. So there's like a whole other societal pressure for women who have this impulsivity. So it's really interesting, and I don't like this list at all.
It's interesting, right? Because I feel like for men, it can almost be seen as a strength because you are interrupting, you were taking control of the situation, it's confidence, it's like fast thinking, all these things. But then on the flip side, I can imagine as a woman who is feeling the pressure to conform to those specific standards, it's completely the opposite.
Yeah, and I've heard this with lots of women with ADHD of how it's just, there is a different standard there. And a lot of times it's why women or girls weren't diagnosed younger also, is because they were pushing this stuff down so much, which is masking, which we can talk about another episode. But all of this is related. It feels related to me as someone who's lived it. So it's very interesting to break it down and look at it.
I want to go back a second. Noelle, you mentioned some of the other reasons for interrupting, and I know you mentioned boredom, excitement, there was some anxiety stuff. I'm curious, when you do a little bit of introspection in which we definitely don't do as ADHD folks, That was sarcasm. We definitely do all the time, too much. I'm curious, do you feel like when you're interrupting, is it coming out of a place of trying to speed that conversation up, or is it from like a anxiety around memory, or maybe just not being good at a conversation and masking and doing it weirdly?
I resonate with the first two, so I feel like a lot of times my brain is just fast and I want to get the conversation going. It feels like I'm trying to get to the point and everyone else is taking a lot of turns to get there. And I'm trying to speed up the process. And the other one is just excitement. Especially if it's something I'm really interested in, I'm excited. I have so much to say about it, probably because I've researched whatever topic for. So yeah, it depends. It's usually really excited or just trying to get to the point a little bit. I think it's that race car brain and not having the brakes to stop and listen. And I don't know if it is anxiety or around social situations for me personally, because I'm an extrovert, but I can see how if someone may be an introvert, that might affect them differently. Yeah, I think now I would say for me, it almost always going to be the excitement or showing interest in what the person is saying. When I was early on, very first getting into therapy before I had switched to coaching, I think a lot of it was the memory piece. Trying to hold so much information in my head while I'm listening to the other person and trying to remember what they said long enough for them to finish and then be able to use all this therapy information and sort of synthesize it with what they said. And there's a lot going on there. And I didn't trust myself to remember it. And that's also anxiety related too, like that worry about remembering things causes anxiety right there.
Yeah, I definitely feel that. There are also instances where I will be so excited about not only the topic, but even just the idea of connecting with this person. Once you get past all the small talk and the boring stuff, which is definitely not interesting to me, when we start getting into something that I do find interesting, or even just the prospect of being able to connect with this other person, I feel like that drives a lot of my interruptions, where I will want to jump in with my own story. And, for somebody who doesn't have ADHD, that's like the opposite of connecting.
I've noticed when I'm surrounded with other ADHD people, the interrupting is not really a thing.
Yeah. We're all like,
we're cool with it. We allow it. The conversation flows quickly and there's connections being made very quickly. And I love being in a group of other people with ADHD because it does allow me to unmask and say what I'm thinking and interrupt. And I don't get that same sharp, what's it called? I don't get the same reaction, I guess, when I'm with a group of ADHD people. So I just wanted to kind of throw that out there.
I was recently at dinner and I noticed that there was this couple sitting behind me and they were talking and they were going on like this ADHD, just jumping from different topics to different topics. And the person I was out with dinner with we were both kind of listening and they were like, they're not even they're just saying stuff. And it felt as an ADHD person, I was like, no, they're predicting what each other's saying and they don't even have to finish their sentences. They just know, okay, now we're moving to this part. Here's a new connection. Here's a new connection. And I find when I'm talking with somebody else who has ADHD, I feel like the conversation is faster and we're kind of making those jumps together. However, I feel like there is also the possibility of us jumping in different directions and then the conversation is like completely lost.
Yeah, we were joking about that at the ADHD conference. It's like you could be in mid-conversation and just walk away and I'd still be like, nah, it's okay. It doesn't matter. That kind of gives me permission to do the same thing. So it's an interesting dynamic to be in a group of, I don't think it's that common to find yourself in that space unless you go to an ADHD conference or have a group of friends. But it's really interesting to put yourself in that place and see the difference of the communication style. I just find it kind of fascinating. And I think it's also a way for me to notice ADHD people in the wild.
Yeah.
Like, how are they communicating? Oh, okay, that person has ADHD. Yeah. Okay, back on track.
When I'm thinking about interrupting, especially in the context of relationships, do you find that this shows up differently, say, in like a romantic relationship versus a workplace relationship?
I do. I think I'm masking more at work generally, and so I'm very aware of it. And I think in my more personal or like romantic relationships, I'm unmasked a little bit more, and so it's more likely for me to interrupt more often. I think masking plays a big part in it for me. Yeah, I would agree with that. I think there's not necessarily a blanket statement that's going to apply to everyone. For example, I work with almost 90%, maybe more, people with ADHD, so I don't mask as much at work. because everyone knows and is used to it and also does it. But, maybe depending on the person and what types of relationships they're in and how comfortable they are in those relationships, there's probably going to be some difference as far as maybe how much you interrupt.
It's interesting because I feel like masking almost becomes a forcing function then for you to slow down and consider what's going on. I don't know that it's necessarily a positive forcing function, but it is an interesting.
Yeah,
thing.
I actually had a conversation with Dr. Tamara Rosier. She wrote Your Brain's Not Broken, and we talked about her on the last episode. But I was kind of feeling like masking wasn't a good thing. Like I had this negative association with masking, and she kind of flipped the script on me a little bit. Like masking is good in some scenarios in a way, if you're in a board meeting, maybe you need to calm it down a little bit. Like sometimes masking serves us in different scenarios. And so I've started to look at it through a different light, but also just being aware of it, or that you have to in this situation, or just being aware of it is a big deal. But I'm kind of leaning towards it's not always a bad thing, but I'm still working my way through that. We can maybe have another episode on masking.
It's almost tailoring your conversation to the other person so that they can receive it.
It's just being aware of the ability to read the room a little bit. It's like that's kind of how she played it, was like, maybe masking is your ability to know the room and know the dynamics of the room, and maybe it's helpful sometimes. Yeah, I legit just finished a blog on masking. And I intentionally put a piece in there about how masking isn't inherently bad. Because whether you have ADHD or ADHD or autism or you're neurotypical, everyone masks in certain situations. Like you're expected to dress a certain way when you go to work or you go to a wedding or some kind of fancy event. You're expected to not curse if you go to religious events, those type of things. And those are socially accepted and normal. And I think the key, you're trying to figure out, okay, well, is masking an issue for me, or is it harmful to me, or is it okay? I think the key there is looking at what is my intention behind it. And if the intention has something to do with guilt or shame, I am trying to hide the way I am, my behaviors, or anything about myself because I'm afraid if I don't hide this, other people are going to judge me. I won't fit in. I'll make someone mad. Those kind of things, that's probably something to look at and see if there are other ways to exist that don't require so much masking, because it does get exhausting, and it is part of why people with ADHD tend to burn out so quickly.
Oh, Lord.
Maybe that'll be like a bonus bit about masking. So we've been talking a lot about what this is and how it manifests in our life. I'm curious, what can we do to address this?
Well, I think there's a few sort of overarching general strategies. First of all, is figuring out the why. You want to figure out, okay, is this an issue with impulse control? Am I super anxious in this situation? Am I struggling with memory or worried about remembering things? Am I super excited? Am I really bored and wanting to move on to the next discussion? What is going on for me that I am interrupting? Then once you figure out, okay, in these contexts, these are kind of my triggers interrupting, then you can start matching coping skills or techniques or whatever to that specific situation. Then, of course, practicing, once you figure out coping skills or techniques or whatever, you want to practice regularly with friends and family. That probably is going to involve communicating your need, explaining to your loved ones, and hey, this is a part of my ADHD. It's something I struggle with just because that's how my brain is wired. I'm trying to learn how to do this differently. You help me practice it, letting them know how they can help. Maybe, hey, your hand up or something whenever I interrupt, so I am aware of it in the moment. And I can take a second to look back and say, oh, why did I do that? And then also self-compassion. We're probably going to talk about this in every episode, but seriously, it is important because the more you beat yourself up, the less dopamine you're going to have, the less executive functioning you're going to have because it sort of siphons the fuel from your brain car.
It almost becomes this thing where you get into these situations where you interrupt, you reflect on it, and you feel bad about it, you beat yourself up, and then in the future you become more anxious about it, which either makes it worse or it means that you pull back too much, which is also not healthy. So I'm curious, have you had experience with actually bringing this up with family or being like, hey, I'm struggling with this and this is how it presents. This is what I mean when I do this, or this is why I do this. Have you had any experience trying to explain this to loved ones and partners?
I mean, like I said, this is something that is kind of a constant conversation with me and my husband, and he will sometimes gently point it out. So he started to just point it out and it was upsetting me. It was hurting my feelings. And so we came up with a gentle way, almost like the hand waving thing for him to point out in a way that I'm interrupting. But I'm always interrupting, so he can't point it out all the time. But it's really just about communication, because I've had to tell him, like, look, this is something that I'm really struggling with that I want to get better at. Or if we're talking about something that I know I'm excited about, I will tell him before. I'll be like, I'm really excited about this. I'm probably going to let me ramble for a second and then, have at it. So we almost do like a pass the baton. Okay, now it's your turn to have your word. And then it almost has to be more planned, just a casual conversation, because I need my time and he needs his time. And then in between, I try to zip it. But it doesn't work perfectly. It's a work in progress. And it depends on if I'm, like you said, if the conversation's boring, I'm probably trying to speed it up. And if it's exciting, I'm probably trying to also speed it up. So it's just like slowing down and like really active listening, like really trying to listen and maybe I don't have to say something about every sentence.
I think that's the bit that I struggle with, is that feeling of I need to say something. I need to participate. I need to make my thoughts known.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is about listening, and really it's so hard to listen when everything in your brain is just like firing, but it's like a practice of just active listening, and it is a work in progress currently.
You even mentioned that like when he pointed it out in you that you were interrupting, that you felt bad. And there's probably like there's just a complex soup of emotions there where it's, well, I was just trying to express myself. I want to be heard, and I feel bad that you feel bad. But there's definitely this other part of it, right, where you're actually making them feel that way, because to them it feels almost like you're dismissing what they're saying to prioritize your own experience.
Yeah. And that is hard with people that you have close relationships with. They want to feel heard. They want to feel, and sometimes it feels like we're not listening because we're interrupting and we're talking so much. It feels like we're not. I think that's the biggest issue with the people that we love, is they're like, are you listening? Are you here? I'm here. I'm just like 5 miles ahead of you. Like, I'm trying to get you to catch up to me.
I'm yelling back.
Come on. But yeah, it is a challenge for sure. That's why I called in.
You mentioned a baton, and I've definitely heard the talking stick before, specifically in the kindergarten class. But I'm curious, especially from you, Noelle, if there are some other tactics that maybe you've come across or that working with your clients that you have recommended or that you would recommend.
Yeah, I think you're going to want to figure out exactly what's going on for you. But depending on what that is, if it's maybe a lot of energy and excitement, maybe you're going into a conversation in advance that is something you're excited about, or even something that you're anxious about. You can do a little bit of exercise beforehand to discharge some of that energy, or during the conversation, maybe there's a fidget or something that you could sneakily fidget with. Maybe even writing notes or doodling during the conversation, just to have some way to get that energy out. That's a whole other brain thing that I could talk about that I think is super fascinating. But basically, the part of our brain that's supposed to shut down while we're listening and paying attention, in neurotypical people, it works. In our brains, that just never happens. It's a whole thing we could talk about at some point. It's really cool. But yeah, taking notes of the thoughts and ideas that come up during the conversation, so you're not worried about remembering what you wanted to say later. And there was one client, it's been a while, but I really remember this particular strategy because it worked really well for them, is they had a partner who wanted to talk about work and stuff like that. they just were not really interested in it. The work that their partner does is not something they really understand or are interested in. And so present and not interrupting or even not getting distracted during those conversations was really tough. The strategy we came up with was to treat conversations like a game, with intention being, I want to show my partner I care by being present for these conversations. And you can do this with anyone, with any conversation. Think ahead of time, or as you're entering the conversation, what is my role here? What is my intention? I sometimes will ask that, especially because I'm that person that random people, even strangers, will just come up to and start talking to and sharing their problems. And I will often pause and say, okay, before I respond, are you wanting therapist hat? Are you wanting coach hat? Are you wanting friend who's you ride or die? What is it you want me to just listen? And once you have a clear idea of what your role is in the conversation, it makes it a lot easier, I think, to decide which of those impulses to follow up on and which to ignore. We came up with this, treat the conversation as if it's a game. The goal is show your partner you care. And instead of focusing on the content of the discussion, focus on your loved one. And as they're talking, be aware of their body language, their facial expression, feeling words that they use, if any, how quiet or how fast they talk or slow or whatever. And as you're noticing these things, those are good things to reflect on and show them that you're paying attention to them. Because really, most of the time, unless they're looking for specific advice, they're not telling you about all this stuff at work because they want you to know that thing at work. Telling you what happened at work, they want to connect with you. Those are all active listening skills. Going to give you you're probably going to be more interested in how your partner's feeling and thinking, what they're actually doing. So yeah.
I love this idea of prioritizing the other person in the conversation, because it is so easy to prioritize your own experience, to be like, I'm bored, or I'm excited, or I want to move the conversation along to this other thing. But being able to say, in this moment, I am prioritizing you to show you how much I care and to make sure that you feel heard. But then also just to make sure that there is that balance in that relationship, whether it is a partner, like a romantic partner, or even a work relationship, right? Because if your coworkers feel like Ryan always just rambles on, he talks about dinosaurs and space and all those other random things in the middle of like our strategy meeting.
Yeah, for sure. I resonate with that because I'm married to an IT guy. He talks about work, and I literally can barely open my laptop. So yeah, I have to really, really focus. I do try to look at, okay, he's just wanting to vent right now. I need to just let him vent. I don't need to know everything about IT to have a conversation with him. So that it is a good reminder. And I think it also just like plays into the active listening. And it's something that I feel like we have to make an effort. You have to really focus on it if you want to get better at it. And it's challenging.
If there was one thing that we could leave our listeners with.
1, 2, 3. Self-compassion. Come on, guys. I thought we were going to all say it at the same time.
Oh. I was like, why is she counting down?
Okay, well, that's the biggest one for me. I feel like self-compassion, just remembering that there's so many complexities with ADHD and just looking at it from a higher lens. Instead of it's always so internal and why am I doing this and why am I doing that? Just take a zoom out and look at it. That would be a good one. And also just maybe find more ADHD friends that you can have these crazy conversations.
Yeah, I think sort of connected to that is have realistic expectations for what to expect. People with ADHD may not ever communicate in the same way that a neurotypical person communicates. We may not ever completely eradicate interrupting because even neurotypical people do it sometimes. So make sure that your expectations for yourself are realistic. Don't say, hey, I'm going to work on this so much in the next week that I'm going to be a pro. It's a lifelong process. It took me just in the therapy arena learning to do that active listening 4 years in grad school, and I'm still learning now as a coach. So it's okay if it takes a while. I think the most important word in the English language to me is the word and. whenever you feel that guilt or shame or whatever it is, when you notice you interrupted, put an and after it. Yeah, I interrupted someone again, and I'm aware of it this time. That's a big step. It gives me the opportunity to learn how to do it better next time.
I love that.
I want to back up because I think self-compassion is key, but it's just figuring out how to communicate this with the people around you and communicate that you're struggling with it. And I think people appreciate open communication in that way. If you say, this is something that I'm struggling with, can you help me here? Most people, they love an opportunity to help another human. And we don't give people that opportunity as much as we should. To just be open and honest about our struggles is really important.
So good. There's also an element of, in communication in general, the goal is, yes, to connect, but to be able to express yourself. And when you are interrupting, you're doing it out of a place of desire to connect, right? And I think that if you can explain that to your loved one, hey, the reason I do this is because I want to connect with you. This is a bid for connection in this situation. Maybe it's a poorly formed one or it's not landing right, but it's a bid for connection. And I think that if they can understand that, they can come at your conversations with them with much more compassion and understanding too.
Yeah.
Oh, I love that.
When people understand why you're doing a thing, they're going to be a lot more compassionate because their brain isn't coming up with your reason for it.
Yeah, exactly. If you're leaving space for them to guess what you're trying to communicate, they're going to fill it in with their own things.
Mm-hmm. The best approach to use in any given situation is going to be different depending on who you're talking to. So if you allow yourself to be vulnerable, say, hey, the reason I'm interrupting is because I'm really excited to share this with you and show you that I care, show you that I understand what you're talking about by sharing a similar experience, or just feeling really anxious about this conversation and it's making it really hard to focus on the topic or whatever it is. Then you can follow it up with, how can I obtain that same goal in this interaction with you in a way that feels better to you?
I tend to do this sometimes with strangers or people who don't know me very well, is I pre-label what I'm about to say. So I might be like, oh, if I can interrupt you for a second, that made me think of, and then I might say it. Or, hey, I know that we're talking about X, but this also is interesting and it just reminded me of this. Or just being able to label it sometimes can set that expectation for the other person of why you're saying it. And it doesn't feel so much like an interruption. It feels more like a continuation.
Why does that feel so advanced? I feel like you're 3 levels above me, Orion. I am not there yet.
I don't think so.
Your brakes are better. You have better brake pads than me.
It's just a life of being misunderstood as an ADHD person.
Oh, goodness.
Okay, I think we've done a fairly decent job of not interrupting each other. We were very, very in control.
Hey, this is Alex, and you're listening to Brainwaves, your guide to all things ADHD, brought to you by Shimmer, the #1 coaching platform for people with ADHD.
Today, we talked about interrupting and how it relates to ADHD and relationships. We explored why it happens, from impulse control issues to excitement or even anxiety. We discussed strategies like using visual cues, practicing active listening, and being vulnerable with loved ones about why we interrupt. A big takeaway for me this episode was just how important it is to prioritize the relationship that we're trying to foster. It can be really easy to be selfish and prioritize our own experience, leaving others feeling unheard. But a simple way to do that is to just let our loved ones know that we often interrupt because we're excited and want to connect with them. Instead of getting frustrated, this might allow them to approach our conversations with more compassion. I personally like framing it as a bid for connection, both for myself and those I might be interrupting. You'll find links to a whole bunch of additional resources and more if you are subscribed to the newsletter or at shimmer.care/brainwaves. If you have a question and want to be featured in a future episode, head over to the site. Again, that's shimmer.care/brainwaves, where you'll be able to submit your audio questions as well as check out our past episodes. Okay, until next time.